Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we're continuing our series on the patriarchs. We're looking at Joseph and his brothers. Last time I should say, we looked at Joseph and the dreams. We saw those three. There were three pairs of dreams that were not only each pair, the two dreams in each pair were connected to each other, but the three pairs of dreams were connected as well. And And one thing that connected them was a common theme about grain. And we ended it. We looked at the last dream and how Joseph had interpreted the dream, and not by some dream interpretation system like the magicians and the wise men of Egypt used, nor did he claim to have a gift of interpreting dreams, as some people have said, which is not found in the Bible anywhere and is often based on this dream interpretation system where like a snake represents this and blah 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 and so on and so forth and maybe a cluster of grapes represents that and so on and so forth. The people who claim to have a gift of interpretation often use, but really it comes from idolatry, and it was worthless. Instead, Joseph told Pharaoh plainly that the interpretations belong to God, and God would give an interpretation of the dream through Joseph to Pharaoh. He made sure God got all the credit. But he left in the interpretation of the dream was a good news, bad news. The good news was years of great plenty were coming. The bad news was they would be followed by years of terrible lack and terrible want. And so bad that they'd actually make people forget about the good years that preceded them. And so he presents Pharaoh this terrible problem, but but not a solution. And that's what we pick up today in Genesis 41, verse 33 through 36. Now let therefore Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and send him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the fifth part of the land of Egypt in the seven plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of those 7 years to come, and lay up the corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that the food shall be for store of the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through famine. Okay, several outstanding things here to note in Joseph's in Joseph's answer. Pharaoh hadn't asked him for a problem, but Joseph realized it's often wise if you present a problem to also suggest a solution to the problem as well. People often will take that and ought to be more willing. But notice what Joseph doesn't say. He says a discreet and wise man, but he doesn't say me. Put me in charge of all this. He's leaving the hands of Pharaoh. He's leaving things in the hands of God. He's not like Jacob, his father, had been before he wrestled with the angel, which we know was Messiah, and changed his ways. Joseph is like him afterwards, and because that happened when Joseph was 6, and he's not trying to make it happen on his own. He's not scheming to get in power or anything like that at all. And his concern is for all these people. And he tells Pharaoh how to solve the problem so that people come. Now we're going to look at Pharaoh's response and reaction to him giving this advice, again, somewhat unsolicited. But he told him the problem, so he gives him a solution as well. And here's what we read in Genesis 41, verses 37 through 40. The thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, for as much as God has shown you all this, there is none so discreet and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than you. Okay, so the Joseph has a good ideal here. Pharaoh recognizes. Now, Pharaoh and everyone else recognizes it too, that this is he's giving them a wise course of action. But look at Pharaoh and look at Pharaoh's words to his servant and think about Joseph. What was his resume up to this point? Shepherd, slave, prisoner. None of the education of anyone else in the court of Pharaoh. Now he had some training, and they was under Potiphar and knew how to conduct himself in the court. And he had a track record. He had a track record of being wise and discreet, as Pharaoh here acknowledges. But he didn't have the education that people may have thought was required to run the country of Egypt. He didn't have the political experience, he didn't have the political ties. He didn't have any kind of family connection. He only had one thing, the Spirit of God. And see what other people may have seen other people may have seen Joseph as a shepherd, which the Egyptians despised, by the way, a slave, and a prisoner. Pharaoh saw someone who understood his problem and knew how to solve it. And if you're a leader, you need to be as wise as Pharaoh. Stop being distracted by all these things, all these things which may have some merit to some case, but they're no substitute for what? The Spirit of God and being wise and discreet. And notice how Pharaoh acknowledges that this came from God. How does he know it came from God? Because Joseph had told him up front from the beginning. And he's not going to find someone like that among the Egyptians. Why? Because they don't worship God. They're worshiping the idols of Egypt. So he puts him in charge. Knows only in the throne I'll be greater than you. This is the third time this has happened to Joseph. Potiphar put him in his house and Joseph was so faithful that Potiphar could just go off and do whatever, and not even worry about his affairs at all. He didn't know anything except what he got to eat every day. He didn't. And Joseph made sure to have something he liked. In the prison, we saw the prisoner. I mean, the prisoner. I'm sorry. The one, the guard, the chief, the warden, we'd say like the prison warden today. The one in charge of the prisoners put Joseph in charge and got to the point where he didn't have to even think about anything either. And Pharaoh now is doing the same thing for the third time. And Joseph has shown himself to be wise and discreet and not an abuser of power. Now, see, yes, God elevated Joseph, but it wasn't all God. Joseph gave a good reason for it. God elevated someone who could be trustworthy in this position of power. And it wasn't all Joseph. Joseph could have never arranged this on his own through his own scheming and efforts. So we continue on here in Genesis 41, in verses 41 through 45, and read the following. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I've set you over all the house of Egypt." And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put on Joseph's hand the rays of vestures of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck and made him ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler over the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without you shall no man lift up his hand or foot in the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-paneah. And he gave him his wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, and Joseph went out all over the land of Egypt. Okay, so there's really kind of a lot in here that but the first thing is he tells Joseph, but then he makes sure everyone else knows it as well. That ring we talked about this before with Judah. That was his signet, his symbol of authority. The stamp, whatever Joseph stamped to that ring, was law. He arrayed him in, he put him in, fine linen. Of course, white speaks of the rights of the saints, but also speaks of a position in society in Egypt at that time. And of course, a gold chain spoke of wealth. Okay, so so he's letting everyone know this is the man. And the second chariot, what that is it's another chariot similar in design and decoration to Pharaoh's. Perhaps perhaps a little smaller or something like that, but definitely recognizable. So everyone will recognize this. And notice everywhere he goes, everyone has to bend the knee and they have to acknowledge him as the ruler. And Pharaoh, of course, Pharaoh reassures Joseph again here. Okay. Reminds him, your authority comes from me, and I'm giving it to you. Now, this name here, Zaphnapania, literally means savior of the world. And we'll talk about this in a future lesson some more. But Joseph's tomb has been found in Egypt by archaeologists. And one reason they know it's his tomb because it has this name written on it, written where to tell whose tomb it was. But yes, in Egyptian that means savior of the world. And his wife here is the priest of On. Well, this priest of On, On was a holy city to the Egyptians, the center of their religion, and so he's the high priest of the Egyptian religion, of their idolatry religion. So now Joseph, of course, as we saw before, there are no more wives to go back over back over in the land of Shinar and otherwise east of the Euphrates River, later Haran. They would, Abraham sent back to get wife for Isaac. Isaac sent Jacob to get a wife from there, a God-fearer. But we found there's no more God-fearing women there. So they're having to marry other women, perhaps some from the camp of Jacob, who perhaps have been raised in fearing God, but others also. So he marries this wife that's this idolater. And why does Pharaoh? Notice Pharaoh gives the wife, not the priest of On. Why does Pharaoh do this? Because he's marrying Joseph as high up in Egyptian society as he can. Joseph, remember, had no family connections, no political connections, but now he does. He is connecting Joseph to the religious system of Egypt. And that only reinforces Joseph's authority. And his wife can help him as well with various political things. Because the high priest cannot stay disentangled from politics any more than the religious political leader can keep themselves disentangled from the religious affairs. There's always some overlap. So this is why he has him marry. Why Pharaoh says, here, marry her. Now when we continue on in Genesis 41 through 46 to 49, we read the following. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out for the presence of Pharaoh and through all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 last years, the earth brought forth by the handfuls. By handfuls, they gathered the food for the 7 years, which is the land of Egypt. And laid up food in the cities, and the food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sea of the sand, very much till he left numbering. Without number. Hey, remember, corn, we see the King James, means grain. Okay, just the old English word for grain. It's barley and wheat in this case, all right? Don't think of a maize American, what the Native Americans raised here before the Europeans showed up, okay? So he's got there's just a super abundance. Now it appears that it was just a tax. He just has to give 1/5. Even though you had the paper, it was really cheap because there was way too much. There was way too much in the if he had stored it away, it would have just rotted. There was way more than they could eat or even sell to other countries around about them, particularly since there are countries around about them weren't in a shortage. So Joseph stores it back instead. And these 7 years is important, these 7 plenteous years, because Pharaoh has done all this based on Joseph's interpretation of his dream. And that interpretation had better come to pass. So we see the first part of it did come to pass. Because if it didn't, not only is Pharaoh going to lose his position, Pharaoh loses life and probably die in some horrific manner. Not just be executed, possibly die in some horrific manner. Pharaoh may have felt like he tried to make a fool of him and may want to make an example of him. But it comes to pass because he really did hear from God. And there's an important point in this. You sometimes hear people say, "Oh, God, such blah blah blah," and it doesn't happen. They may have had a dream, but it wasn't from God. They had an interpretation of the dream. Maybe someone else gave it to them. Someone claims they have a gift of interpretation, but it didn't come to pass. It wasn't, the interpretation wasn't from God. Even the dream was. Even Joseph had got the interpretation wrong. The dream was still from God. But if God's in it, it's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, God is not in it. It's people's own imagination or Satan or something like that. Okay. But if God's in it, it will come to pass. Now we continue on in Genesis 41 in verses 50 through 53. We read the following. And unto Joseph were 2 sons before the years of the famine came, which Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bare unto him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. For God, he said, as made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. Then the second called he Ephraim. For God has called me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. In the 7 years of plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt were ended. Okay, so during these 7 years, it's a happy marriage. And the names Joseph's getting picked is doing the naming here, but still, his wife is coming over. It's coming over to God, and perhaps is already inclined that way from seeing how Joseph was able to interpret the dreams when all these other weren't. Perhaps she suspected there was, the idol thing was kind of a scam in the first place, or knew being the. And look, God's forget all my toil, my father's house. He hadn't forgot their existence necessarily, but he's forgotten all the trouble he's had. Remember, he was 30 years old, we saw when he stood up. He came when he was 17, 13 years. 13 years, 10 years a slave, 3 in prison. And we'll show a minute why I say 3. We'll show a minute why I say 3. And life is so good, he's forgotten about those. He's been fruitful in the land of his affliction. He's been in nothing but afflicted those first 13 years. But God caused him to be fruitful. First under Potiphar, then even in prison. But now, over the whole land of Egypt, there's no higher position he can get. And the reason why, now you might think, well, God could have made him Pharaoh, but God does not operate that way. God will never put, you'll notice a pattern. Not just that Joseph said it showing here first, but go on later. Go on later to like in Purim, we talk about Purim. And we talk about Mordecai. He's raised up to second command. Daniel is second in command under 2 Babylonian kings and under 2 Persian kings. God never, because God's way is the ruler And when Messiah reigns the earth, it's going to be this way. The Bible just explicitly tells us this. Is always going to be someone of their own people. So the highest position available for someone who's not of that ethnicity, who's not of that, has got that ancestry that ties of that people of that people, is where Joseph's at. That's why that far and no further, just in case you were wondering. Okay, but now it's ended. Well, that's important too. As Joseph told him 7 years and only 7 years. Eighth year comes around, Joseph's gonna have a problem. Now we continue on in Genesis 40. We continue on in Genesis 41 in verses 54 through 57. And the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph has said. And the dearth was in all the land, for all the land of Egypt was, but in all the land of Egypt, in all lands, I'm sorry, but in the land of all, but all the land of Egypt, there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh cried, said unto all the Egyptians, go unto Joseph. Why says you do? And the famine was over the face, all over the was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the stores, sold to the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all the countries came into Egypt to Joseph to buy corn. The famine was so sore in all lands. Now, first of all, over this expression, over all the face of the earth. Now, this famine was in, say, North and South America. Well, everyone would have died. Okay, they didn't know Egypt didn't know it exists, and so on and so forth. And part of the problem here is that word earth, just like in English, earth can refer to dirt, can refer to dry land, it can refer to the planet. Okay, it doesn't mean it means the land in that area. Okay, and what lands are we talking about? All lands. All lands are all those lands that had this connection with Egypt, that were able to trade with Egypt, and so on and so forth. It's even quite, it's kind of doubtful that China could have, would have been able to send enough over there to get enough grain, a huge enough caravan, and taking maybe perhaps 2 years each direction. People would have starved in 4 years. But it's something about the air. All those people already connected to all these lands connected to Egypt, who we're in a position where we could get there in a reasonable amount of time. And this includes on the Mediterranean all the way around the Med, from Spain all the way over on the Black Sea up to Russia, and the places that could get reasonably far enough from those places. Perhaps there was no real trade at this time between the British Isles if they were even occupied yet, and the mainland of Europe. In fact, the Romans didn't even know the Greeks had only heard of them as a myth and called them the 10 Isles. So, much later than this. But a good part of mainland Europe, a good part of the continent of Africa, those again, where people could reasonably get there in, say, 6 months' time and come back. Something like that, where they could get by for maybe a year, or maybe a season. Agriculture year, say maybe half a year, an agricultural season, I should say, maybe 6 months. So that, but it definitely included places they could get there by sea, by trade, which include Arabia. India was already in the Indus Valley culture in India today in general, along Kerala, along the coast there, the Arabian Sea was certainly in trade with Egypt already at this time. And all these people come there and trade. But when these sort of things happen, there's always some who stay. We'll talk about that later in a future lesson. We'll probably refer back to this. But there's people from all over who've come to Egypt because of the bread, because the famine was in their land as well. But again, when it says the earth, don't think the whole planet, the land, the land, and it's limited, of course, by this other statement about the lands where they came in. They couldn't be anywhere that was too far away to make the trip. But still, the ones who could reasonably make the trip and back covered most of Africa, most of Europe, most of Asia, or most of what people would call the old world. We continue. We continue on here in Genesis 42 verses 1 through 4. And when when Jacob saw there was corn, and when Jacob saw there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look upon one another?" He said, "Behold, I've heard there is corn in Egypt. Get you down there and buy food from us from there. They may live and not die." And Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy corn in Egypt. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob, sent not with his brother, for he said, "Peradventure mischief may befall him." Okay, what do we see here? All right, so the famine's definitely in Canaan. I mean, it's not the 10-day journey we're told in one place. Okay, it's not very far away at all. Definitely in that realm. That definitely in that realm where they go to Egypt and get food. And Jacob's like, "Well, go down there and get some, because without they're going to die." And we'll discuss in a moment about the importance of grain, because there are some things still growing. We shall see, but they're not sufficient. Grain makes up about, by calorie count, as far as calories goes, makes up about 70% of the human diet, even today and back then as well. So so that's and also it's for feeding the animals, which relied on grass. Remember, the cattle were withered too in Egypt, right? So without you're not your livestock is going to die as well. So he's going to continue. So he sends him down to get some. Now, and we continue on Genesis 42, verse 5 through 8. We see this: the sons of Jacob of Israel came to buy born among those that came. The famine was in the land of Canaan. And Joseph was governor over the land, and he it is that sowed all the people in the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with all their face to the earth. And Joseph saw his brother, and he knew them. And he knew them, but he made himself strange to them, spoke roughly to them. And he said to them, "Whence are you come?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." And Joseph knew his brethren, and they knew him not. Okay, there's really a lot in here, and I'll try to cover it for you. Okay, notice it mentions the famine was in the land of Canaan. Again, reinforcing, I mean, if it's over the whole planet, obviously in Canaan, but all lands, again, it means all lands you could reasonably get to Egypt and back, in time to get grain. And relied on grain, which are primarily lands with large cities. People are hunters and gatherers, might be able to get by if there's a drought like this. And we'll look at that in a moment. They might be able to get by to some degree through a drought like this. If not, maybe not. Some perish, but not all. But large cities are totally dependent upon any city. A city's like a tree. And the farms around it are like the soil. The city, the soil doesn't depend on the city. The city depends on the soil. I mean, the tree doesn't depend on the soil. The soil doesn't depend on the tree. Couldn't care less if the tree's there or not. The tree depends on the soil. Take it out of the soil, it dies. Okay. So it's like that with cities and grain. So that's this first point here. Now, who's here? These are his 10 brothers, the same that sold him into slavery. And they bow themselves to their faces to the earth. Remember his first dream, 10 grains, stalks of grain, their 10 bowing to his stock of grain. Now it's all coming together. Their stalks are withered and gone. They're bowing down to him over grain, over food. And so and lastly, we need to look at this stuff. How Joseph, I mean, he doesn't let them know it's him, but notice his brothers do not recognize him. Joseph, to Panath, 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 Panatha, ah, boy. Zaphanapania, Savior of the world, is a picture of Yeshua. And this is and this is prophetic here, okay? This is prophetic here. Why didn't they recognize him? Why was he made strange unto them? Because he looked, talked, and acted like an Egyptian. Even remember he's given a chariot like Pharaoh's and stuff. He's dressed similar to Pharaoh. His haircut is similar to Pharaoh's. He's got that that eye makeup you see with the Egyptian men, which, by the way, wasn't some sort of cross-dressing thing. It was like when football players or soldiers put that eye paint around there to block the sun, okay? Because there was lots of land and little shade. I mean, lots of sun, little shade in Egypt. This is why the Egyptian men originally did this. It wasn't nothing about cross-dress or anything. But he looks like an Egyptian. He's been remade into the image of an Egyptian. So his brothers did not know him. Well, in the same way, his brothers who represent the Jewish people do not recognize Messiah today for centuries because he'd been remade into the image of a Gentile. The Egyptians are Gentiles. For example, in my children's Bible growing up, Jesus and Jesus alone was tall, very light skinned. I mean, we're talking like Norwegian, not quite toilet paper white, but close. Okay. Blonde haired, blue eyed, good looking. And nothing like the description, nothing like how he really looks, as you can see in the Bible itself. He'd been remade into the image. Now, it turns out the people who made my children's Bible were off in Eureka Springs, and they were although they said they were Christians, they were a white supremacist group, and they had remade Jesus into a white man with blonde hair, blue eye, an Aryan. Someone, to look like someone Hitler would have been proud of. And so, of course, when Jewish people see this and you tell them, oh, this is your Messiah, this is the Messiah, they don't recognize him. He doesn't look Jewish. He doesn't act Jewish. Nothing Jewish about him. He's not dressed Jewish. He's not, except. And this picture of Joseph, his brother's not recognizing him because he's being remade into the image of a Gentile, is prophetic about what happened to the Jewish people concerning Messiah, Jesus. But thank God, Jews and Gentiles today, that's Jews and Christians, I should say, that's been reversed around 1995 or 2000, somewhere in there. One day, it's like suddenly all these Gentile Christians went, hey, Jesus was Jewish. All these Jews in Israel went, hey, Jesus was Jewish. Jesus was Jewish? But they've come to recognize this by and large. And that's part of it's because of the tourist industry. That's to their advantage, these Jewish that come there to the land of Israel, except, huh? But for a long period of time, their eyes were blinded to this. It had been remade into the image of a Gentile. And there's more prophetic things foreshadowed as we shall see today in this story. Now we continue on Genesis 42 and verses 9 through 12. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed of them. And he said to them, "You are spies. To sit in nakedness in the land you are come." They said to him, "Nay, my lord, but to buy food your servants are come. We're all one man's son. We are true men. Your servants are no spies?" To them, "Nay, but to sit in nakedness in the land you are come." Okay, remember, Joseph remembered the dreams he dreamed of them. When they're bowing down to him, it comes back. Oh, yeah, I kind of forgot about his father's house. Oh, yeah, I had that dream with the 10 stocks of their 10 stocks of grain bowing down to my stock of grain. But he doesn't just reveal himself right away. He wants to test them first because they did not treat him so kindly before. And he wants to see if they're still if they're the same as they were before or not, or perhaps they've changed, which perhaps he's really hoping for. So he's giving them this test. They claim we're all one man's son. Okay. They claim they're not spies. They claim they're true men, that they're men who act in honesty and stuff, which was definitely not the case. We looked at the previous. Not only did they throw him in a pit, Joseph, and sell him as a slave. Before that, though, we looked at Jacob's children, and saw how how his 10 brothers and his sister basically lived wickedly, and basically lived wickedly, even to the point of some killing an entire city over the sin of one man who tried to make things right with them, by the way, and wouldn't even blame their sister, was equally guilty. So he needs to know if they've really changed or not. So this accusation. Now, why about the nakedness of the land? That he's implying they're spies for military purposes. They're coming in and see if this famine has made Egypt defenseless, so they can take it over somehow. And he's foreshadowing the accusation that's going to come upon the Jewish people many times, but particularly after his time, the same type of accusation can be made against the Hebrews, that they're going to try to take over the country militarily in some manner. And we'll talk about that more in a future lesson, but he has to test them to see if it's true or not. Now we continue on. Remember, life's been good to him, and he doesn't necessarily want that screwed up by them. Now, continue on in Genesis 42, verse 13 through 6, and read the following. And they said, your servants are 12 brethren, the son of one man in the land of Canaan. Behold, the youngest is with our father, and one is not. And Joseph said to them, that it is as I spoke unto you, saying, you are spies. Hereby shall be proved. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go forth from here, except your youngest brother come here. Send one of you. Let him fetch your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be proved, for there being truth in you. Or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. Okay, by the life of Pharaoh is just an expression they used, an expression they used to say, but it talks about, the seriousness of it, of course, be similar to someone saying, I swear to God today, such and such is true. So, but they've just given him some important information that their father is alive, is with us, and his younger brother is alive as well. And notice there's 12 brethren, and one is not recognizing they're talking to one that's not. The one they've rejected, they do not recognize. Just like the Jewish people today have rejected Messiah and do not recognize him as belonging to them. In fact, Jewish people today, sometimes when I had a friend who became a believer, his father wrote him out of the will. His father was an atheist, but Jewish, but he's an atheist as far as religion. He wrote him out of his will and had a funeral for him. He was dead to his father. And Joseph is dead to them. And Messiah is dead as well. Even the ones who recognize Jesus, they recognize Jesus, Yeshua is Jewish. Often they'll say, unfortunately, like that. The evidence is overwhelming. They can't deny it, but they wish it wasn't so. Joseph, he is not, even though he is their brethren, their flesh and blood, most do not acknowledge him as such, as foreshadowed here. Now we continue on in Genesis 42, verse 17 through 20. And he put them in the ward 3 days. And Joseph said to them on the 3rd day, do this and live, for I fear God. Be true, men. If one of your brethren be bound in the house of your prison, go you and carry corn for the families of your houses. But bring your youngest brother to me, so your word shall be verified and shall not die. And they did so. Okay, maybe he's going to put all of them in there originally, he said, and send one back. Of course, I think it happened to a lone traveler, but he left them there for 3 days. Now, why 3 days? We know from when the baker had the dream we saw last time, Joseph interpreted it till he told Pharaoh was 2 whole years. Joseph was in there before that point. So he seems to he was in there along to get the guards, get the trust of the guard, of the warden, of the prison warden, and be put in charge, and so on and so forth. And so that tax perhaps took a year, 1 day for every year he was in prison. But that was on the 3rd day. That prison's a picture of the tomb of Messiah. Come out and live. Messiah came out and lived. So now he says, just keep one back. But you got to bring him his brother. And they agree to this. But they're not happy about it. As we see here as we continue on Genesis 42 and verse 21 through 24. They said to one another, we are verily guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the anguish in his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Wherefore this distress has come upon us. And Reuben said to them, spake I not to you, saying, do not sin against the child, and you would not hear? Now behold, also his blood is required. They knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them by an interpreter. He turned himself about from them and wept, and returned to them again and communed with them, and took from them Simeon and bound him before their eyes. Okay. Now notice a change of heart they're showing. They're admitting their own guilt now, admitting the guilt of their family. Remember, we looked at the children of Joseph. It was constantly, and up all the way to the thing with Tamar gave Judah no choice but to admit it was all his fault, and she was more worthy than him, and she was more righteous than him. All the way up to that point, it was always not the family, someone else's, except fault, not our fault. They could, their family could do no wrong. What was their attitude before, but now they admit their family did do wrong to their own brother. And they recognize this, they're reaping what they sowed. They've quit blaming other people, and they're accepting responsibility. And notice Reuben reminds them, told you so. But as we saw, Reuben had planned to rescue Joseph. But Reuben should have stood between them and Joseph. He was the eldest. He had the birthright. He had the blessing, being in charge, blessing, being in charge of the fire. He had the birthright. He had the blessing because he was the oldest, and the blessing came with the responsibility of leading, responsibility of being willing to, if required, put his life down, protect those he led. That's true leadership. It's the leadership Messiah demonstrated. And Reuben just fell short. Okay. And his blood is required. They don't know what happened to Joseph. As far as they know, he's dead. Now, notice who they take. Oh, Joseph takes. Who they decide on? Simeon. Well, remember Simeon was one of the two deceitful brothers that killed the city over the sin of one man that their daughter that their sister was equally guilty with. But there's another thing about Simeon. It's prophetic as well. Judas Iscariot. Iscariot literally means from Kerioth. Kerioth was a city of Simeon scattered throughout Judah. He's the only disciple that we know of that's not a Galilean. He may have been in Galilee, but he's from the city of he's from the tribe of Simeon. And so what happens? Simeon is not going back, is not going into the promised land with them. Just as Judah did not go into the promised land with the other 11. He is bound before their eyes, tied with a rope. He's tied with a rope before their eyes, just as Judas with a rope hung himself. Now we continue on in Genesis 42 and read the following in verses 25 through 28. And Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn and to restore every man's money to his sack and give them provision by the way. And thus he did unto them. And they laid their ass to the corn, departed from there. And as one of them opened his sack to give his ass provender in the end, he espied his money, for behold, it was in his sack's mouth. He said to his brethren, my money is restored, lo, is it even in my sack? And their heart failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, what is this God has done unto us? Okay, so notice what Joseph does. He felt, remember, I mean, he had so much grain, it couldn't keep count of it. He restores them. He restores them their money. He doesn't need it. And for all he knows, that's all the money that their father has. And he knows this famine's going to last 7 years. They don't know it, but he knows it. They may need that money to buy more food later. And notice he also not just gives them, not just their sacks, but also gives them food for their animals as well. Notice they're walking there and the animals are carrying the grain because they can't, the need for grain is so severe. They have to have the animals. That's all the animals going to be carrying. It's even possible they're carrying some grain as well on their backs. I mean, getting at grain is the utmost importance. But when they get to the end, they find it. Now, that one thing they could have done was went back to Egypt and said, "Hey, my money was in there. I don't know how it happened," but they don't. And the reason, and the reason is the urgency of getting this back to where Jacob is in the land of Canaan. Food is running out. And that's why Jacob sent him there in the first place. Because we see he's very hesitant about Egypt, and will become more apparent next lesson. But notice this last thing. Now the money is restored, and what has God done unto us? I mean, is this a blessing? Or is this God payback for how they treated Joseph? It's that's the thing. When you've done wrong to other people, there's even the world, even the world, they will have expressions like what comes around goes around, except. And when you've done wrong to other people, it makes you paranoid. Anything out of the ordinary, your mind instantly goes there and starts thinking badly, starts being in a negative mindset. They're not like, oh man, what a blessing, God, God has done, look, done unto us, kind of like how, God's punishing them. Is there fear here? And we'll see that become apparent instead of God's blessing them. Why? Because they have guilt over that. They treated Joseph, and not just guilt, they know they've watched in their own father's life. Paybacks are coming, and paybacks are terrible, as they've seen in the life of their own father. We continue on here in Genesis 42, verse 29 through 34. They came to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan and told him all that befell them, saying, the man who is Lord of the land spake roughly to us, took us for spies of the country. And we said to him, we are true men, we are no spies. We be 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is not the youngest of this day, our father in the land of Canaan. And the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, hereby shall know you're true men. Leave one of your brethren with me, and take food for the famine of your households, and be gone. And bring your youngest brother to me. Then I shall know you are no spies, but you are true men. So deliver your brother, and you shall traffic in the land. I'm going to start at the beginning there. Traffic in the land. Yes, travel in the land, coming in and out, but also the ideal they can engage in commerce in the land. They conduct commerce there as well. Perhaps they will have money, but they could buy something to sell to get money to buy the grain or whatever. So, notice they call him the Lord of the land. They don't recognize him. And often Jewish people today, someone will recognize, oh yeah, well particularly those evangelicals, they're pro-Israel, except, and this Jesus is good for them. He's not Lord of Israel, but he is Lord over these Gentiles out there, because they don't know him as their brethren, and so is with these. His thing, he's Lord over these other people. And now they've informed their father they can't go back. They told him about Jacob and Benjamin. They can't go back without Benjamin. Well, we continue on here in verses 42 through in chapter 42, verse 35 through 38. We read the following. And it came to pass, they emptied their sacks, but every man's bundle was in his sack. And both they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob, his father, said unto them, you have bereaved my children. Joseph is not. Simeon is not. You'll take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. And Jacob said to his father, saying, slay my two, Reuben said to his father, slay my two sons if I bring him not to you. Deliver him into my hand, I'll bring him again. He said, my son will not go down with you, for his brother is dead and he is left alone. If mischief have fallen by the way you go, then you shall bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Okay, notice every man's bundle. Remember, these represent the people of Israel. Well, they are. There's the people of Israel today. the majority of the people of Israel. The favor's not gone away from them, but they're afraid. They don't understand. And notice their father's afraid as well. And what's their fear? They're going to have an accusation made against them. It may not be true, but still there. They may think the man will accuse them of having stolen the money. And this is some payback as well. Remember, we saw before out this pattern before where Abraham made a false assumption about some they were idol worship, but he still made false assumptions about it. And they didn't intend to, the king didn't intend to do any of those things that Abraham had thought, and it brought the man trouble. Isaac did the same thing, and then Jacob did the same thing, even with his brother Esau. Assumed he was going to kill him, and that was the last thing he said 20 years earlier, but it wasn't true at all. And now there's that expectation again. Paybacks are coming. Paybacks that now they're going to be accused of others of bad intentions when the other person could not know their intentions falsely, because that's what they've done. And also, even his sons, how they blamed Shechem, but didn't give without blaming Dinah. Made it all sound like it was all how Judah had blamed Tamar until he was caught and had no choice but to admit she was more righteous than him. And they're afraid the way they've treated other people they're going to be treated the same way. And those, you bereave me of my children. He suspects that that's something with Joseph's disappearance. Simeon and Benjamin, he recognized he's still being paid back for the way he's treated his parent, Isaac, his father, his parents in particular. They were bereaved of their children. Jacob left, remember, because of his deceit. Ishmael, never the same relationship between him and his mother. And when Jacob did come back, Ishmael, even though his father was still alive, wasn't over living with his father anymore. He's over in Seir. He's accepted things the way they are, and he's moved to Seir way ahead of time. He could have waited till his father died or got close to that, but no, he married in over there and moved to Seir in southern Jordan today. And Isaac was all alone, bereaved of his children. And now Jacob's afraid it's going to happen to him. He's lost three. He's lost three of them. He's bereaved of some of his children. And he realizes paybacks have not finished. Paybacks are terrible. How he treated his father is coming back, and his mother is coming back on him. Now, Reuben, once again, falls short of being a leader. Slay my two sons if I don't deliver him. He's making an effort, but it's not enough. He's once again not willing to go far enough. Someone might say, well, today, if he was like a president, say, he was a weak president. He led, but he wasn't strong enough in his leading. He's not being silent, but he is not. But notice Jacob's response: my son will not go down with you, where his brother's dead. Isn't Reuben his son? Isn't he his others? Jacob still has this problem we talked about last time of favoritism. And that favoritism brought trouble to Joseph. And it'll bring trouble. It's going to bring trouble as far as Jacob's concerned to Benjamin as well now. My hairs will go down in sorrow. Even if he had the Benjamin, he'd still have his other 10 sons, but that problem with favoritism is causing him sorrow and grief. And favoritism, mind you, we're told in James not to be a respecter of persons. In the law, God says, be holy because I am holy. And he tells him, I do not regard any man above another. We're not to show favoritism. It is sin to do so. And Jacob is still not learned that yet. Well, we continue on in Genesis 43, in the next chapter, in Genesis 43, in verses 1 through 5. The famine was sore in the land. That came to pass, they eaten up the corn they brought out of Egypt. Their father said to them, Go again, buy us a little food. And Judah spoke unto him, saying, This man did solemnly protest to us, saying, You shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. If we send our brother with us, if you will send your brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. We will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, We shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. Okay, so Jake Joseph knows it's gonna last 7 years again. Jacob and them don't. Jacob tried to wait it out. But but Judah now speaks up and reminds him we cannot go there without Joseph, without Benjamin. That was your brother, the man said. Benjamin is his brother as much as the others, but he's not like the others. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Now we continue on in 43, verses 6 through 10. Verse 6 through 10, we read the following. Israel said, Wherefore shall you dealt so ill with me? Tell the man where you had the other brother. And they said, The man has strayed our state and of our kindred, saying, Is your father yet alive? Have you another brother? We tell him according to these words. We certainly could not know that he would say, Bring your brother down. And Judah said to Israel's father, Send a lad with me, and we'll arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and with also our little ones. And I'll be a surety for him. Of my hand you shall require him. If I bring him not unto you and send him before you, let me bear the blame forever. Except we had lingered, surely now we have returned the second time. Okay, so that last part, they have already been there and back. If they've been keep waiting, Jacob has just been waiting and waiting and waiting till he has no choice. Because this brother, he doesn't want to lose this one son. And remember, Simeon's in jail all this time. He's going to be in jail till Benjamin shows up. And Jacob, again, favoritism, was willing to let Simeon just keep staying in jail. All it takes to get Simeon out of jail is show up with Benjamin. But Judah reminds him, steps up and reminds him that there is no choice. And notice, I will be a surety for him. Not my sons, like Reuben had said, weak leadership, strong leadership. I will bear the blame. And that, it could even be that Jacob could slay him if that's what they're required. I will bear the blame forever. And remember, this is a picture of Messiah who bore our blame and was a surety for us. To bring what? Salvation to the Jewish people as well as the rest of the world. Savior of the world. Zaphnath Panina. Savior of the world. Okay. So we continue on here in Genesis 43, verse 11 through 14. And their father Israel said unto them, If it must be so now, do this. Take of the best fruits of the land your vessels, and carry down the man a present, a little balm, a little honey, spice and myrrh, nuts and almonds. And take double money in your hand, the money that was brought again to the mouths of your sacks, carry it again in your hand. Peradventure it was an oversight. Take also your brother, rise and go into the man. And God Almighty give you the mercy before the man may send you away your other brother and Benjamin. If I bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. Okay, so first, notice this gift here. The fruits of the land, the best of the fruits. The fruit trees are still producing fruit. There's nuts and almonds. Remember, there aren't almonds and nuts. No, actually, they're not. They're related to cherries. Believe it or not, and they're actually they're kind of, the almonds are the pit. Someone eating it'd be someone eating the pit of a cherry, and also they bloom in the winter. Interestingly enough, so there's a little food, but again, 70% of human intake is grain, and the animals certainly can't live on these things. So he's sending some things down there, a little honey. So he's sending some of the food from the land of Canaan, as a gift, and give him back double the money. You're not going to buy the grain again with the same money you bought it before. You're going to make sure he gets his money again to show that they're honest. That this they don't want. He's very concerned with this accusation against them. You make sure. Perhaps it was an oversight. It was there was a mistake. They meant to take the money and they didn't, or whatever the case was. Perhaps it was an accident. Now, your other brother, he reminds him Joseph, their brother, and Benjamin. And Benjamin, of course, is separate from these other 12 for the reason. And remember, Benjamin was born after Jacob repented, not when he's 6 years old, like Joseph, and has never known anything but Jacob to be honest and doing right. He's maybe heard stories from his brothers, but he's never experienced it himself. We continue on Genesis 43, verse 15 through 18. I'm going to address one more thing here. And you might think, well, why didn't Jacob just go down there himself as well? Why didn't Joseph, for that matter, ask for him to come? Because remember, he's lame. His hip was thrown out of socket when he wrestled, when he would not let go. He became the God wrestler, Israel. And they have to walk, as I mentioned earlier. He cannot make the journey. And they cannot afford to take some of their animals and put him on there because they need him to bring grain back. They don't know how long this famine's going to go on. And they need more food. And they got to spare every animal they can to carry food. Now we continue on Genesis 43 in verses 15 through 18. And here's what we read. And the men took that present. They doubled the money. They took double money in their hand. And Benjamin and rose and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. And Joseph saw Benjamin with them and he said to the ruler of the house, bring these men home, slay and make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon. And the man did as Joseph bade, and the men brought them to Joseph's house. The men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house. They said, because the money that was in our return our sacks the first time are we brought in, you may seek occasion against us and fall on us and take us for bondmen and our asses. Okay, they have this present. It's double money, double favor. And Messiah, and the prophets speak of a time when Israel accepts Messiah, they're going to have double favor and beyond. But for the bad they've experienced, they'll have double from God in good. And then, of course, Benjamin, the son of the right hand. And we'll talk more about that a little later. Who they're now bringing with them. And so now they come in, and now when they're brought in the man's house, They called him Lord of Egypt. This should have been something of great joy for them. Except for Pharaoh, they're being brought to the most important the house of the most important man in all of Egypt. But it's not. They're afraid. And why? Because because of what they're afraid of things coming back on them, what they've sown, reaping it. They made accusations themselves against people, and just as their fathers had done, they weren't true. Afraid that's going to come back on with the occasion. They're afraid of being sold into slavery, being made into slaves as they sold Joseph into slavery. And they're afraid of their livestock being taken. Just they took the livestock of the city of Shechem when they killed everyone in the city. And they took away the livestock of that city. They're afraid, and that's the thing. When you're guilty and you've lived wickedly, you get paranoid because you know you deserve, and you also know you're going to, what comes around goes around. It is going to come back on you someday, some way. And it keeps you from enjoying what you have today. That's part of the payback. It's not just what happens, it's the dread of what's going to happen before it happens. And this is what's going on. They cannot enjoy what they should have been. This should have been a time of great enjoyment for them. Instead, it's a time of anguish because of the fear of being paid back for the evil they've done. Now we continue on in Genesis 43 in verses 19 through 22. They came near to the steward of Joseph's house and communed with him at the door of the house and said, "Oh, sir, we came indeed at the first time to buy food. And it came to pass when we came to the inn, we opened our sacks, but every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we brought it again under our hand. And other money we brought down to our hands to buy food. We cannot tell who put the money in our sack." Okay, now remember they're talking to the steward of Joseph's house. Joseph's not there at this moment. He has sent them with their steward to wait for him to eat lunch with them. And so they're talking to the steward first, perhaps hoping the steward will talk to them on their behalf to Joseph. And notice how full weight, we're giving all of it back. And tell us something, they weighed money still. You know, we'd seen before coins that were weighed, okay? We saw this before. There's coins, but they're weighing them. They're like maybe the first ones we know were like square pieces of silver or whatever. They still weigh them, you know, just in case people are dishonest or something. So there's still this weighing going on, and they brought more money to buy more food. And they're letting him know, we didn't do this. We don't know how that happened, but we didn't do it. They're answering that accusation. They're afraid it's going to come upon them before it ever comes upon them. And if you've ever known someone who's maybe blurted out something they were guilty of that you had no clue about, perhaps they did you wrong, you didn't even know. The truth is, it's killing them, and they can't wait to get it off their chest. It's why so many people who are killers and things are brought in. They really they can many of them break down and confess because the weight of keeping it in is harder on them. Is hard. It seems worse to them than the punishment that will come for confessing. We can see this. Continue to see this in Genesis 43, and we continue on Genesis 43 in verse 23 to 25. Read the following. He said, "Peace be unto you, and fear not. But your God and the God of your fathers give you the treasure in your sacks. I had your money." And he brought Simeon out to them. And the man brought them into Joseph's house and gave them water and washed their feet, and he gave their asses provender. They made ready the present against Joseph to come at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. So notice, peace, fear not your God. This man's an Egyptian. Now he's been under Joseph. Maybe Joseph ripped off him. Maybe it's his God too, but he doesn't say that. Okay. The God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we're talking about, not the God of Ishmael and Abraham, as the Muslims may try to say, the God of Abraham and Jacob. Now Simeon's brought out to them. Simeon's jail time is over, and in the latter days there will be a restoration of Simeon. I'm looking ahead to another lesson. We'll talk about that in more details. And there's a restoration here of Simeon as well. And now they're wanting to give Joseph this present. And what's a present? It's tribute, really, right? It's the same word in Hebrew. They're going to give him a tribute, as it were. Again, acknowledging his rulership. Now, when we look at our last section, we begin here with in Genesis 43, verses 26 through 28. When Joseph came home, they brought the present which was in their hand at the house, and they bowed themselves to the earth. And he asked them their welfare and says, your father well, the man of old, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he yet alive? And they answered and said, our father is in good health. Thy servant, your father, is in good health, and he is yet alive. And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance. You notice they bowed him twice, bowed to the earth first time, then they just bow their heads. Who? The 10 who threw him in the pit plus Benjamin. Remember, he saw a second dream, 11 stars, and the father understood it was his 11 brothers and the son of the moon. Son of the moon are not here yet, but now the 11 stars part of that is being fulfilled. And he's yet alive. Well, he had to be alive to fulfill the part about the sun and the moon because Jacob understood it right away that sun represented him. And we continue on Genesis 43 in verses 29 through 31. He lifted up his eyes and he saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. And he said, is this your younger brother of whom you spake unto me? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. And Joseph made haste, for his bowels had yearned upon his brother. And he sought there to weep, and entered into his chamber and wept there. And he washed his face, and he went out and refrained himself and said, set on bread. Okay. So Joseph almost lost it here, okay? He had to go separate it. And maybe there's, a little lesson there for us. Sometimes when it's not, we want to act a certain way because of our emotions, but the wise thing to do is refrain ourselves. We may need to separate. Notice he didn't carry out in front of a bunch of other people and whatever. It's like I told my daughter-in-law about her children when she's younger. They're driving her crazy and whatever. Like, look, you can fall apart for a little bit and get yourself together, but you can't do it in front of your children, okay? And that's what's going on here. He can't do it in front of his brothers, so he separated himself. And as he washed his face, he went out. So that he's washed the tears off. They can't see that he's been crying, etc. And what's got him all choked up is what? His younger brother, his mother's son. And this is why Jacob is favoring Benjamin. It's not just people say, well, the baby of the family. In some families, that's true. They're favored. Some they're not. My brothers, in my case, my youngest brother was often overlooked because he was the youngest. But in some cases, some families, that's really true. Particularly when they've had him as an old age. And Benjamin was born sometime after Joseph was 6, and he was 6. Jacob was 97. So Jacob was definitely his old age when Benjamin was born, perhaps 100 or so. There's that age difference in between Joseph and Benjamin. Notice, you know, my son, I mean, indicating kind of an age difference. There's probably not just 6 years younger than him. All right. And notice, but the main reason is because he wanted Rachel. He got these other women. We talked about the wives of Jacob, how things came back. I mean, there were four wives. He only wanted one. And, and, and how this one, and that's why Jacob's been favoring him. But this son, it's brought trouble on this son to some degree. He's had to be severed from his father and come down here to Egypt, except it's caused him a little bit of problems. Or maybe he wanted to go to Egypt and was happy to do it. Maybe dad never let him do nothing, and now he's glad he got to go somewhere and do something. But either way, Joseph had to refrain himself. Now, and we end here in Genesis 43, today's lesson in Genesis 43 and verse 32 through 34, about Joseph and his brothers with this. And they set on for him by himself, and then by themselves, and for the Egyptians which should eat with them by themselves. Because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. And they sat before him the firstborn, and they sat before him the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth, and the men marveled at one another. They took and sent plates of food, that's what messes are, unto them before him. But Benjamin's mess was 5 times as much as any of the other of theirs. And they drank and were merry with him. Okay, they're finally relieved here. Now, there's a little bit here we want to talk about here. It's important concerning the Egyptians here. All right, we've established now the Hebrews, Abraham being the first one, called a Hebrew, crossed over because he came to the other side of the Euphrates. It's been over 200 years since he crossed over when he was 75. And they've lived in Canaan, but they don't look like the Canaanites. They dress differently. They don't worship the same God, most importantly, except, and even though they've had to speak, even the Bible refers to Hebrew as the language of Canaan. It's definitely a different dialect. I mean, that's how did Joseph get an interpreter for Hebrew earlier if these, people are the only ones that are speaking it? No, because it's dialect of Canaanite. It's a Canaanite dialect. And, there's plenty of people, and Canaan's right near Egypt, and there's plenty of interpreters for that. So that's how he was able to speak to him. The only people who spoke Hebrew were them. He had to have one of them for his interpreter. So that should, clue you in right there. But there's a definite, so the Hebrews are definitely distinctive. They've got, they've got, their language is a little different. They dress differently. They dress notably differently than the Canaanites, because they came from Aram, Syria, and their skin color is different. And we know this from the Egyptian hieroglyphics, paintings inside Egyptian tombs of the Hebrews. They're lighter skinned than the Canaanites, and and the thing is, we've seen it continually when we looked at Joseph in the dreams. There's already a prejudice against them. Potiphar's wife, this Hebrew you brought, not this slave, this Hebrew. And the Egyptians have known this too. It's an abomination to them to eat with the Hebrews. They won't eat bread with them. So notice that these 11 brothers are by themselves. The Egyptians are separate from them. But notice Joseph is with neither group. Joseph is by himself, separate from them. And it's a picture of Messiah. For so many of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people who follow him get separated from the Jewish people. But the world does not accept them as belonging to them either, the Gentiles. And particularly, this has been historically a problem in churches because, until recent times, this whole messianic movement was messianic, was Jewish people who had Jewish ancestors, driven the Jewish culture, come to Messiah, wanting to retain their Hebrew identity, not be Gentile. And we look at this, the customs of the law, how they apply to these Jewish people. In fact, if through your male lineage, particularly if you're a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you better put yourself under the whole law because they already made a covenant regarding you, and your ancestors made a covenant regarding you in the wilderness, but then apply to the Gentiles. And yet, so what happens is these followers of Messiah who are Jewish are accepted neither by the Gentiles, even often believers, or by their fellow Jews according to the flesh. And speaking and non-believing Gentiles particularly are an abomination. Hebrews are an abomination to them. They're always blaming them for things they didn't do. Always, if things go south, they want to scapegoat the Jews. And that's foreshadowed by this not eating with them, being an abomination. They never accept them. And notice, even though Joseph has been made to look like them, it seems to apply to him as well. He's over there eating by himself. He's off eating by himself. Now, lastly, notice the birthright according to the firstborn according to his birthright. Reuben still has the birthright and the blessing. As I mentioned before, it's the oldest, is to lose. And he can lose it through various ways. But Joseph recognized he still has the birthright. And the youngest according to his youth, and he's put them all in their age. And now, notice last one, which knows Benjamin's is 5 times as much as theirs. And 5 often speaks of grace, okay? Like 5 fruits of the Spirit. No, I'm sorry. No, 5 fruits of the Spirit, there's 9. But 5 often speaks of grace. 5-fold ministry is what I'm trying to say, to give God's ministry of grace to us. Except, and Benjamin has 5 times. We mentioned before that double portion that's coming to Israel, double for its trouble. The Messiah reigns. Benjamin, the son of the right hand. When Israel returns to Messiah, when that day comes that Shaul, the Apostle Paul, wrote about in Romans, all of Israel be saved. It's all grace, and wealth is going to come upon them that's like unto this 5 times what they had before. They're going to be doubled, but part of that doubling includes a great amount of wealth. They're going to be exalted above all other nations when they accept Messiah as their ruler. And they, as a people, become the son of the right hand. That's all I have for this week. Until next week, shalom.